So the next phase of this really is data authentication, right? How do we go about collecting this data in a forensically sound manner that makes sure there's no potential spoliation along the way, right? So when we look at this, I like to pull up one example we hear often, and I know we've got some counterpoints to this, so it's always fun. But the first is really, let's just take a phone, for instance, and do a screenshot of a text message, right? Is that, looking at this particular one, does that look like it is a real text message?
Yes.
It looks authentic. Well, I happen to grab that directly from ifaketextmessage.com. So this was all of 30 seconds to key in the conversation I wanted to capture. And so as much as it is used sometimes, and Melissa, I'm going to turn over to you here shortly for some counterpoints here, but you need to have an authentication process around this data, even if it is just a handful of text messages from a screenshot, because that's all you really needed. So Melissa, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so first of all, well done, ifaketextmessage.com. This looks good to me. And that's right. I mean, on its face, it looks to be authentic, and there is some case law out there that suggests that screenshots are not, more than suggests, that have ruled that screenshots are not necessarily admissible in court. My position on this is maybe a little controversial, though maybe not. I mean, okay, so first, collections, especially remote collections, relatively cheap. So maybe collecting at the outset of data sources that are going to be relevant. We know that our clients are using those means of communicating. Maybe we do that. However, does that mean that we ultimately have to process that data, load up that data, produce that data with all the metadata? That becomes expensive. And depending on the needs of the case, sometimes, in my opinion, we don't need to do it. I mean, screenshots can be authenticated using the normal ways that we authenticate all documents. Rick, you created this using ifaketextmessage.com, but you're an honest guy. And, if you came into court, would you testify that this is a true and accurate depiction of something that you actually sent to Rob here? And maybe you would, and then we would litigate that. Yeah. Ultimately, we may need to bolster production of screenshots in order to prove that, in fact, this is an authentic text message to Rob. But depending on the needs of the case, it may not be required. There are cases of all sizes here, and sometimes it's just not proportional to the needs of the case. And so I'm always looking out for ways to save my clients money, and I do feel like you can authenticate screenshots, and if you need to litigate it, that's when you go there.
Yeah, and Jerry, in 1 second, it makes sense to me if there's just a handful of text messages that are relevant, right? Why go through the whole process? So that does make sense to me. So I will. I'll turn it over to Jerry, because I'll concede that point. But go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I do have a pretty strong opinion on this, and that is it's always better to do a forensically defensible collection, because it's almost the authentication happens due to the expert involved performing the collection, their credentials, and oftentimes hash values are taken at the time of collection. But I do agree with Melissa that there is an opportunity to authenticate after the fact. And so we have been brought in after collections have been performed, whether they're self-collections by custodians or collections performed by internal IT. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just not taking those considerations, those forensically defensible considerations up front. But if there is something suspicious or at issue, there are measures we can take to try and authenticate after the fact. I'll tell you what, with this I think text message thing in one of my cases, it came up, aside from these being screenshots and or produced as evidence themselves, I think they're more commonly used as screenshots that you later embed in a text conversation. Like I just had 2 weeks ago a case where a custodian had reported to IT some sexual harassment and had used iFake text message to embed that into a conversation they sent to HR. What this accuser, and not to diminish any, the validity of any accusations, but in this particular case, from a forensic perspective, when you're using iFake text message, you don't actually get to see what the file name is for that screenshot, and you don't know what it is once you embed it into a another text message conversation. But when we extracted that forensically, we saw that the file name for that embedded screenshot said fake text message. So that was the file name, and unbeknownst to, whoops. So it's those sorts of things that we can catch, upon forensic examination, whether that's at the time of evidence acquisition or after the fact during a forensic analysis to authenticate.
Well, and Rick, if you'll allow me, I would like to take the middle ground between Melissa and Jerry. And I would say, I generally lean towards thinking that screenshots are problematic a lot more often than they are not problematic. And I think the reason is sort of what we're seeing right now, which is it is very easier than I could have ever really thought to make things up and to make up a text message exchange that looks completely legitimate and that like it was real. I mean, I think that's the obvious reason why screenshots can be problematic. So I lean that way, generally speaking. But what I'll say is this: I think the most important thing is what I've sort of been saying over and over here is figuring out early on what's important to your case, right? Because not all cases are different, and it's the classic, lawyer response of it depends. Well, it does depend because each case is going to be totally different, and if text messages are not important in your case, or if there's just one text message that actually matters, then that's a really good thing to know as early as possible so that you can have that conversation with opposing counsel and say, listen, there's not that much that's important with text messages. Can we agree to the following? Can we agree that we will screenshot this one text message and use that for evidentiary purposes? But if text messages, like if there's a sexual harassment claim or something where there's a lot of text exchanging going back and forth, and that's a critical piece of the case is when did it happen and who did it, and that maybe that the forensic collection is going to be vital to that case, and you're going to absolutely want to make sure that you're doing that. So I just think it's really important to think about that and assess that up front so that you can figure out which is going to, because if you can save your client money, then you should save your client money. But if text messages are really important, then they might have to bite the bullet because that's going to be critical for them winning their case.